On the night of November 20, 2003, in South St. Louis, a woman disappeared, leaving a community shaken and questions unanswered. The events that followed would challenge the city, the justice system, and history itself. Amber McLaughlin's name would become central to a case that would set a precedent in ways few could have predicted. Stay with this story, you'll want to see every moment unfold. If you're following this case closely, subscribe now, don't miss the next chapter. The details ahead are crucial, subscribe before it's too late to stay informed. Don't let this story pass you by, hit that subscribe button now. Only those who care about true crime history will follow along, subscribe or explain why in the comments. Amber McLaughlin and Beverly Guenther's lives intersected under circumstances that would lead to a legal and historical milestone. In the months before November 2003, tensions escalated between the two. Guenther obtained a protective order after incidents of harassment and a home break-in. Authorities were aware and occasionally escorted her to ensure safety. When the events of November unfolded, these prior warnings and legal measures framed the urgency and significance of the investigation. The case would draw attention from local leaders, the media, and later, national observers. Amber McLaughlin's early life included experiences that would later become central to discussions during appeals and clemency efforts. She spent part of her childhood in foster care before being adopted by a family in Missouri. Reports indicated instances of abuse and neglect during her formative years, contributing to long-term psychological and behavioral challenges. By her teenage years, McLaughlin had already encountered the justice system, including a 1992 conviction for sexual assault, which placed her on the sex offender registry. Mental health evaluations later cited borderline intellectual functioning and symptoms consistent with fetal alcohol exposure. Beverly Guenther, the victim, lived a stable life but had become cautious due to escalating concerns over her safety. She had ended her relationship with McLaughlin prior to the events of 2003. In response to repeated harassment, Guenther obtained a protective restraining order. Police occasionally provided escorts to her workplace, highlighting the severity of her concerns. In October 2003, a break-in at her home intensified fears and prompted additional legal measures. These events framed the context for law enforcement, the community, and McLaughlin's eventual trial. Every prior warning, every precaution, and every documented incident would later be revisited during the investigation and court proceedings. On November 20, 2003, Beverly Guenther failed to return home from her workplace in South St. Louis, prompting immediate concern among friends and neighbors. Authorities began tracing her last known movements, noting her routine and the prior security measures she had in place. The investigation quickly focused on known associates with previous conflicts, including Amber McLaughlin, whose interactions with Guenther had already drawn police attention. Police reviewed records of previous harassment complaints and confirmed the recent restraining order. Surveillance, witness statements, and interviews revealed that Guenther had consistently sought protection, and officers had escorted her to her car in the days leading up to her disappearance. On the day she went missing, neighbors reported seeing unusual activity near her workplace. These reports, combined with prior incidents, allowed law enforcement to prioritize leads efficiently. Forensic teams collected evidence from locations associated with both Guenther and McLaughlin. Physical traces connected McLaughlin to areas relevant to the investigation. Each piece of information, from witness testimony to documented prior incidents, was carefully logged and analyzed. Investigators also reviewed McLaughlin's movements and communication patterns during the critical hours surrounding Guenther's disappearance. The accumulation of evidence, paired with careful chronological mapping, enabled authorities to construct a timeline that would become central to the case presented in court. Following the completion of the investigation, Amber McLaughlin was formally charged with first-degree murder, armed criminal action, and related offenses. The trial began in the mid-2000s, with the court reviewing months of evidence, including witness statements, prior documented conflicts, and law enforcement reports. During proceedings, the prosecution outlined the timeline of events and emphasized the legal measures Guenther had taken to protect herself. The defense presented McLaughlin's background, highlighting early childhood experiences, prior convictions, and mental health evaluations. Arguments focused on factors they believed could have influenced behavior and decision-making. After deliberation, the jury reached a deadlock on certain charges, leading the presiding judge to impose a death sentence based on first-degree murder conviction under Missouri law. Subsequent appeals examined the fairness of the trial, the jury instructions, and the consideration of mitigating circumstances, including McLaughlin's mental health and past trauma. In 2016, a resentencing hearing took place, and years later, in 2021, appellate courts reinstated the original death sentence. Each stage of the trial and appeals highlighted both the procedural intricacies of the legal system and the broader societal discussions surrounding justice, accountability, and legal protections. Subscribe now to understand how every legal step shaped this historic case. If you skip, comment why you won't follow how justice unfolded. Every detail matters. Hit subscribe before the next portion dives into the post-conviction developments. Those committed to understanding the law in action, subscribe now. Don't miss the legal twists. Subscribe or explain why in the comments. While serving her sentence, Amber McLaughlin underwent a gender transition, a development that added a complex layer to public and legal discussions surrounding her case. Lawyers and advocates filed multiple clemency petitions citing her traumatic childhood, prior convictions, and documented mental health challenges. These petitions emphasized that McLaughlin's early life experiences and ongoing psychological struggles had not been fully considered during the original trial. Prominent figures, including members of Congress and advocacy groups, requested that Missouri Governor Mike Parson review her case, highlighting the historical and social implications of executing a transgender individual. Legal teams submitted detailed documentation outlining mitigation factors, while corrections officials monitored McLaughlin's behavior in custody. Each motion and response contributed to a broader conversation about justice, mental health, and the ethical considerations involved in capital punishment cases. On December 8, 2022, the state of Missouri carried out the execution of Amber McLaughlin. This marked a historical moment, as she became the first openly transgender woman to be executed in the United States. All appeals and clemency requests had been reviewed and ultimately denied by the courts and by Governor Mike Parson. Leading up to the execution, legal representatives, advocacy groups, and family members continued to emphasize McLaughlin's background, mental health, and mitigating circumstances. Court documents and official statements outlined the timeline and procedures, adhering strictly to state legal protocols. Corrections officials confirmed the completion of the legal process without incident. The case sparked national discussions on gender, mental health, and capital punishment, highlighting how legal systems confront complex social and ethical issues while enforcing established laws. The case of Amber McLaughlin stands as a complex example of how personal history, legal systems, and societal factors intersect in the administration of justice. From the early warnings and protective measures taken by Beverly Guenther to the extensive investigation and courtroom proceedings, every step illustrates the challenges of balancing public safety, individual rights, and procedural fairness. Legal experts have highlighted the significance of thorough documentation, mental health assessments, and the consideration of mitigating circumstances in capital cases. Advocacy groups emphasize the importance of reviewing clemency requests with attention to both social and ethical implications, demonstrating how legal decisions can have historical and societal impact. For viewers, the cautionary lesson is clear: awareness of legal protections, documentation of risks, and understanding the justice process can influence outcomes in profound ways. The case also underscores the continuing dialogue on justice, equity, and accountability in capital punishment decisions. These reflections provide context, understanding, and a professional lens on one of the most significant cases in recent history. Subscribe now to stay informed about critical legal cases and societal lessons. Those who skip, leave a comment explaining why you won't learn from these legal insights. Every procedural detail matters. Hit subscribe before exploring more landmark cases. To understand justice in action, subscribe now. Don't let these lessons pass unnoticed. Subscribe or explain why in the comments.